Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Are the Kremlin and President Putin, along with President Trump, playing a game of will he, won't he, now that Trump has extended an invitation to Putin to attend the G20 Summit in Miami later this year? This is a significant contrast between Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk's warnings of a short-term threat and President Trump's push for diplomatic helpfulness by inviting Putin to Miami. Trump's mere intention of extending an invitation is a symbolic victory of the U.S. Russia rapprochement we are witnessing. To tell us more, I am joined by Andreas Umland, Policy Fellow at the European Policy Institute in Kyiv. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
So President Trump stated that it would be very helpful for Putin to attend the Miami summit. From a Central and Eastern European perspective, does this invitation signal perhaps a normalization of Russia-US relations and perhaps of the mere invasion of Ukraine?
We have already many such signals. This is not the first. And we had, for instance, the votes by the United States in the UN Security Council that were supporting Russia partly, and the visit to Alaska of Putin and so on. And this is yet another attempt to sort of attract Putin somehow to a more constructive stance regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war, but it will not work as the previous ones. On the contrary, it will, in a way, legitimize Russia's war and will encourage Putin to continue the war instead of incentivizing him to end it.
Putin has perhaps, well, I think he has actually avoided travel due to the ICC warrant. Since the U.S. is not a member of the ICC, Miami perhaps is perceived as a safe harbor in many ways. Do you think that hosting Putin on American soil will effectively dismantle the international legal pressure built against the Kremlin?
We had this already in Alaska, and if that now continues, this will indeed be not good for international law, and it will legitimize the deportation of Ukrainian children. That was the reason for the warrant from the International Criminal Court. If that is something that that the U.S. wants to legitimize or support in any way, then he should perhaps go to Miami, Putin. I mean, it's a strange behavior and a strange negotiation tactic. What is necessary to end the war is pressure on Putin so that he sees the war as a risk to his political power, for the Russian economy. Then he will be ready for compromise. But these sort of signals that we're seeing in the last year from Trump are having the contrary effect.
Just based on these two questions I've asked, do you think that there is some kind of undermining of the power of the ICC, given that, you know, it's beginning to appear that, you know, if one head of state can invite another head of state that has an ICC warrant, and there seems to be no challenge to the fact that, you know, he is an international war criminal, what is the power of the ICC in this case?
Unfortunately, I would say the power of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is limited. Neither Russia nor the US are members of this court, and that's why they can act in the way they are acting. Although I think the establishment of this court, as well as of other international organizations, courts and institutions, is an achievement and should be supported, and is also, I would say, in the national interest of the US. But here the interpretations are different, and unfortunately, of course, this behavior, not only by countries like Russia and China, but also by a democracy like the United States, is undermining the idea of international law and of persecution also in an international context of such crimes as the deportation of children, which could also be interpreted as a form of genocide. According to the Genocide Convention, the bringing of children from one ethnic group to another ethnic group is a form of genocide. And that's why, of course, this behavior is very, very subversive.
Trump has suggested that Putin's presence could be useful for dialogue at the G20 Summit. I wanted to ask, based on your research into the Kremlin's ideology, does Putin perhaps view this invitation as an opening for peace in some way, or is it perhaps a confirmation to him that the Western resolve is essentially crumbling against him?
I hope for the first interpretation that you have given, that this will be a step towards peace, but I don't believe in it. When Russia annexed Crimea, it was a member of the G8 and was then thrown out of the G8 group. The G8 and then became the G7 group again. The G7 was a more exclusive club, and Russia was admitted to this more exclusive club, but this didn't prevent Russia from the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. And here, I believe the same effect will be there, that instead of incentivizing Putin to seek compromise, it will actually encourage him. It will sort of signal to him that he is still part of the international community, and that the war against Ukraine is not diminishing his international standing. There are, of course, also other frameworks like the BRICS group or the Shanghai Cooperation organizations where, in a way, Russia is legitimized. Russia is still a member of the UN and the UN Security Council. But this meeting, if Putin will indeed be there, will be yet another signal to Russia and to the whole world, in fact, that you can have these sort of expansionist wars with annexations, with genocide, with mass torture, with deportation of children, and so on, that this is all okay, and you can do that and will still be accepted in the international community.
Time and time again, there has been this emphasis, it's very open, that there is absolutely no margin of negotiation with Vladimir Putin. So why have him at this international summit that essentially signals some kind of victory for him? Obviously, there's a lot that can happen between now and the summit. So we're essentially talking about a hypothetical situation. But is there a possibility, knowing how Trump operates, it's very unpredictable, very volatile, that he might have some broader strategy? Or is he simply just taking advantage of his position and the fact that the summit is taking place in the US?
I'm afraid we will only know when the historians will get into this, when they will have access to the archives and see also the internal communication within Russia or unpublished communication between the US and Russia. And only then we will have a better understanding, actually, the cause of this America that has been unsuccessful for more than a year already, but is still continuing, and these attempts are still made to offer some sort of platform for Putin, where he would then presumably become more moderate in his demands. That has not worked in the past. It will not work now, I'm afraid. And what exactly stands behind it is unclear. Either it's naivete, it's a lack of understanding of Russian motivations and Russian international behavior, or it is something more devious, I would say, that there is some sort of secret connection between the Trump administration and the Russian leadership that that makes Washington behave in the way it has behaved during the last year.
Well, keeping in mind that really Ukraine is in such a difficult situation, what does this invitation thus far, because it only is an invitation, what does this signal to the Ukrainian government?
I'm here now speaking from Kiev, and I think the disillusionment in Kiev with the Trump administration is very deep already in any way. So I guess this will be here for most Ukrainian observers not much of a surprise. Yet another unpleasant aspect of this strange rapprochement between Washington and Moscow during the last year, and in a way also again humiliating as previous similar meetings like the summit in Anchorage. But I guess there's anyway already skepticism here in Ukraine, and if indeed Putin appears in Miami, this will be yet another support of this skepticism.
Yes, a slap in the face. Almost. We've obviously seen the article where Prime Minister Donald Tusk has expressed his concerns regarding, shall we say, the U.S. Polish alliance. And obviously, whenever President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they've always spoken very warmly of the Polish-U.S. alliance and its assurances of that relationship. But these are diplomatic words, essentially. But what we see happening suggests something else, really. And now we see this invitation, which, again, is essentially, one could argue, a diplomatic gesture. But what does this really suggest in terms of where the eastern flank should be heading? Are we moving to a position where really Europe has to depend upon itself when it comes to defending itself against Russia?
Yes, there's a lot of inconsistency from Washington, and even paradoxical behavior by Washington, for instance, with regard to the Orban government, when on the one side the US was proclaiming that Europe should take care of the support for Ukraine. And on the other side, it was supporting the Orban government that was undermining the European support for Ukraine, which is seemingly a very unstrategic and paradoxical, contradictory behavior. And against this background, against the background of many other statements and actions by the second Trump administration, indeed, the Europeans should get together and should rely on themselves in securing their countries from a perhaps a Russian invasion, and they have to now by themselves support Ukraine, because we cannot expect much from the United States. Again, here the paradoxical situation being that most of Americans, we know this from opinion polls, are actually very supportive of Ukraine, very critical of Russia, and very critical in particular of Putin. But for some reason, the Trump administration is not reflecting this popular American preference, and is behaving in contradiction, actually, to what, as I see it, Americans want from their government with regard to this war.
Okay, Andreas Umland, thank you so much for joining us today. And that's all from us on World Talks this morning. Thank you for being with us, and make sure that you stay with TVP World. Goodbye.